Welcome, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, and Alvin. How's everybody tonight?
Great!
Yay, we have a quorum. Good deal. Welcome to our monthly Edgar Cayce on series. Tonight, presentation is Edgar Cayce on What is My Purpose? This is a pretty interesting one here, because what we're talking about with this one is pretty personal, because this is how I came across to develop what my purpose is by using the various Edgar Cayce readings. Consequently, in our disclaimer, we always talk about it's, based on how we perceive things and our opinion of what he says. But this one's kind of going to be a little bit different in that it's more of a reflection on what my purpose is after having been in the Cayce readings for the number of years that I have, and having a deeper understanding of them. And it's pretty, the way I have it set up is we have a purpose in life, both material and spiritual. And the conclusion that I've reached over the years is that the material is used to support the spiritual and brings into your spiritual growth if you choose to frame it in those terms within yourself. I've identified 3 key precepts that have enabled me to focus on in order to achieve what I believe my purpose is to be. And I'm going to talk about each of these independently. And so this is kind of a personal, reflection here. So kind of inside of the cracked egg, if you will. What is my purpose? This is a question often posed throughout the readings. And in this one, Cayce pretty much summarizes the whole thing in a nutshell. And it says, as oft been given to make known in one's own life the love of the Father God. That's your purpose. In other words, to reestablish our relationship with God. Reestablish it here to now start to bring into fruition glory to God through my own personal actions. And I often believe that some of this has a lot to do with ourselves, not just me, but it could be similar to a lot of other folks. And in the spiritual purpose section on from a search from God, the purpose for which our souls chose to come into this earth plane was to awaken the divine within, which is done through manifesting the fruits of the Spirit towards our fellow man. The readings are very, very consistent in that they state our road to redemption is paved with our fellow man. We're each one helping another. Consequently, we have got to learn to overcome ourselves in order to raise our spiritual awareness. This overcoming is through works with our fellow man. We're interacting with a lot of people. They challenge us often. And it's these challenges that we find that we need to reflect back on and realize that the challenge is there for a reason, not just to aggravate you. Okay? It may seem differently at the time, but it's truly an opportunity for us individually on how we choose to conduct ourselves towards the individual relationships we have forged with our fellow man. Okay? Now, Cayce was very specific also in that, hence, the life must be a purposeful one. with a purposeful experience and expression in its relationships. 4. Some laws are ever in evidence in the experience of those who take thought. This was relatively meaning to me because how do you rectify and bring into awareness within your own self what your purpose is? And then once you determine what your purpose is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to take it to the next level? And Cayce was big on universal laws. And the laws that are of universal nature are always in play. But we have got to think about that. We've got to bring these laws into our awareness. We may often say, yeah, I know this, this, and this. But until we take ownership of those laws and start to apply it with purposeful intent, then we are not really grasping what we're being told. Consequently, we have to really think about this. And I have to say that the Cayce readings have been a very, very good source for fruitful thought. Those of you who've read the Cayce readings before understand that they could, to the uninitiated, take on a cryptic overview where, what in God's name is he talking about here? Because it's hard to read by virtue of a lot of the older style English. And quite honestly, that was purposeful. I think when we found out with Hilaliel coming into the program, some people just wanted it to make it a lot easier for themselves. But the way that Cayce's connection with the Christ being is the easier way. It makes a lot more sense for us. It's easier on us. Consequently, when you start to study these things, you have to really think about what it is that's being said. And then the second part comes into play, which is, what does it mean to me? And once you determine what it means to you, then the obvious follow-on is, okay, how are you going to apply it? What are you going to do with it? And I've had a lot of these conversations with myself, okay? In another reading, Cayce tells us that each soul's entrance into material consciousness should represent to the entity the awareness that a universal consciousness, God, is aware of the entity's purposes, the entity's aims. And this consciousness represents an opportunity for the entity in the material experience to become a channel to glorify that purpose, that cause. This is interesting because this is in play around us throughout our days. Everything on this earth, in its own way, shape, or form, though may not be recognized in our material consciousness, in its own way glorifies God. If you look at a pretty sunset or a sunrise, that's a glorification to God because, wow, it made you ooh and ah. If you look at the wildflowers or a pretty rose, you pick up the aromatic sense of those things. It's appealing to you. By that being appealing to you, then that entity, whether it's a rose, a flower, whatever, is actually paying homage to God in its own way. There's a lesson there for us to look for. And it's the lesson that I've found for me purposely is to now take that which I can control, which are my only thoughts, my words, and my deeds, the only three things in life that I feel that I can purposely control, and use those for the betterment to glorify God by applying them with loving intent towards our fellow man. And that's how I've kind of put it together in the space between the ears upstairs, okay, which is pretty much a mess anyway. These are the criterions for every individual's experience. Sincerity of purpose, of desire, putting the whole law into effect in the activities, which is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, thy mind, thy body, and thy neighbor as thyself. This is the whole law. All other things, given or written, are only the interpreting of same. Pretty much Matthew 22:36-40 right there. We've got to be sincere with that which we do. Cayce had a very interesting take on the difference between personality and individuality. He says that personality is what we want other people to think of us. Individuality is who we truly are. And the same thing is that if we're not sincere with our purposes or our desires to try to apply the whole law, loving God, in our case through our activities with our fellow man, then we're just fooling ourselves, because God shall not be mocked. God knows what's in the heart, not the facade that we may be putting on. Consequently, we in our desires must be very, very purposeful and intent with the right reason. And in a lot of retrospective thinking about the previous 60-something years, I could see that a lot of my actions previous to my time with the Cayce readings has not necessarily been undertaken with the correct intent. And guess what? That didn't work worth a damn at the end. Short-term gratification versus longer-term pain. So these are some of the things that, you wish that you knew or actually took ownership of many, many moons ago, because life would have certainly been a hell of a lot easier. Wouldn't have been nowhere near as fun, but it would have been a lot of fun. Anyhow, that's this. So, my purpose, right here, to reestablish my relationship with God. The three building blocks that I determined for myself are patience, self-control, and then knowing self. These are the three key elements within the Cayce readings that I have personally found for me enables me to work towards the goal of reestablishing my relationship with God. Okay? When we're starting with patience with yourself, I found, is important. Patience with others is paramount. Patience with God really helps. And patience with our surroundings. Oftentimes, we say we are faithful, and we pray to God that this happens. And the one thing that a lot of the Cayce readings and life in general with our respect to the Almighty is that we can get what we want, but it's the when that seems to be missing somewhat. And it's the lack of a definite when you get this, that, or whatever that tends to wear on our patience. So this is another one of those things that I have actually found to be very, very helpful in my personal life. In the 1554 readings, Cayce tells us that patience is the lesson that each soul must learn in its sojourn through materiality. We're all here to learn patience. And maybe if we just take the topic or the definition and take it at face value, we have a very loose-fitting definition of what we interpret patience to be. But patience, I have found, is something that is always at the ready. You need to have it handy because you never know what you're going to run into when you're going to run into it. Oftentimes when we're driving, maybe that's a call for us to exercise some patience. When you're at the store and in a hurry to go from A to B, and there's somebody up there counting pennies out in front of you, that's an exercise in patience for yourself. Dr. Peter Shobe, marriage is an exercise in patience, both with your spouse and yourself, Stephen, as he would always tell me. So this is a really, really big lesson for me that I have found. And in the Search for God series on patience, it says, through patience does the understanding come. Knowledge of itself is nothing. Understanding in the Lord becomes that of love in patience that maketh for the glorifying of that which is the gift of the Father in the material, the mental, the spiritual world. If our road to redemption is through our activities with our fellow man, then we need to understand that each of us are not necessarily on the same spiritual page. None of us know exactly where we are. The only thing that we know is that we're here 3 rocks from the sun. Other than that, we have absolutely no clue where upon the spiritual path we are. Are we starting it out? Are we at the end? Are we somewhere in the middle? Nobody knows. And it really doesn't matter where we are, because what's truly matter is what we're going to do with the time we have on our hands right now. And if we act purposefully and with intent and with loving intent, then we're going to move in the correct direction from a spiritual basis. Each of our understandings that we have comes through patience, because we actually start to, when exercising patience with other people, start to perhaps put our feet in their shoes and see what they're going through. And it gives us an opportunity to treat them in a much fairer nature oftentimes. And when you think about how we flounder through life and ask yourself, does God show me patience? If the answer is yes, then why shouldn't we return to favor through our fellow man? God's been very patient with me, I can attest. So it would behoove me to take this and develop some level of understanding. You know, what's the old saying? You know, knowledge is not power, knowing what to do with it is. I think that's what Cayce's saying here. Because you've got to be knowing what to do. You have some information now. How are you going to use it? And with what intent? In knowledge and power comes responsibility, that in patience may be tested in self. Be not overcome by either trials or by those joys that make forgetfulness of the source from which the power comes. And this is an important thing, because this is a statement of temperance. To be patient with ourselves, to be patient with our surroundings, and to be patient with God, and more with others as well. Because there's going to be trials and tribulations in life. We know that. We're going to be tested. But it's how we react to these tests that truly matters. Quite honestly, it's really oftentimes not the outcome, but it's the approach that we take. And it's the approach that we take if we exercise patience in that which we are experiencing, then we are better able to really get a grip on a little bit of a bigger picture, because we're starting to take control of ourselves. We're starting to run in a little bit deeper. Consequently, when things are going really well for us and we're happy campers, we need to also understand that this part doesn't come from us in and of ourselves. Cayce tells us with respect to folks who are in fact power, they didn't get there in and of themselves. It wasn't there by accident. They got there by divine guidance. God wants them there in that position to do something. Consequently, we need to remember that we are being given a gift, and it helps us to measure it in a method so that we can be appreciative of it and understand where it's coming from, and it doesn't start from what's coming back at you from the mirror. God is giving you this. You are now using it. If you're using it with the proper intent, then things are going to become a lot better. The question was posed to Mr. Cayce. What has really happened to an individual when they think their patience has completely worn out? Cayce says that they have lost patience with themselves. That's interesting, because that's certainly worthy of some ponderance. I've lost patience with myself. Now, oftentimes when we get our chains pulled, we're going to deflect blame upon another. That person's always aggravating me. This person, that. I hate this traffic. This, that, or the other. Okay? And what's happening is that we are allowing the circumstances to control ourselves. We are giving control of our emotions to outside influences, because we are not being patient. We haven't lost faith. We've lost patience with ourselves. We're making a willful choice not to be patient. So maybe when you think about it from the God perspective, how many times have you done things that, if God was in fact human and not God, though we make him to be one of the same, how would God react towards you? And you can see that God has an enormous amount of patience. We are being shown that this is the way that we need to be. Not just for here, but perhaps even for the hereafter. As Cayce tells us, that we are supposed to be companions and co-creators. If we don't have patience, how can we be an adequate co-creator? Perhaps we can't. Taking or enduring hardships or censure or idiosyncrasies of others is not necessarily patience at all. It may become merely that of being a drudge, not only to self, but an outlet of expression from others that may never be quite satisfying because there is no resistance. Cayce tells us, and with this, is that you don't have to put up with a bunch of crap from people. That's not necessarily patience. And that some of the source of these hardships or idiosyncrasies may simply be that nobody has ever stood up and pushed back. Cayce tells us that it's okay to get mad, just don't sin doing it. Sometimes people just need to know that where the line is. You got to make a stand. You don't have to be submissive to everything. This is what Cayce defines as active patience. You're being active in it. You're taking a part. And you're trying to actually, by defending yourself, you may actually be helping somebody else. Because maybe they need that pushback. Maybe they need that for themselves. But don't think that you have to kowtow to all this stuff, because you really don't. Cayce further explains that this does not mean becoming a goody. No, far from it. Be able to look every man in the face and tell him to go to hell. But live as he did, the lowly Nazarene. That means stand up for what you believe, your truth. You don't have to insult somebody. You don't have to demean them. But you can be pushing back, so to speak, in a firm way by stating your values. And if your values are founded in your interpretation of the Christ, and you're doing them for those reasons, then maybe you are in fact speaking the truth. And that's what Jesus did. A lot of people were always trying to pull his chain, push his buttons. He didn't put up with that always. You know, you remember there's a deal that as a youngster he got quite aggravated with Goldman Sachs. I mean, the money changers. Right? Yeah. But he wasn't sinning. He didn't go in and attack a person. Rather, he was perhaps attacking an act, not the actor. And that's an important thing for us to learn, because maybe it helps others, and maybe it also will help us in some ways. When we reach the development of ceasing to see faults in those we contact, is it then, the question was asked, that we can say we have patience? When we see rather him that we worship even in the faults of others, then we are at the beginning of patience. At the beginning of patience, when we cease to see faults in others. When we see him, despite the faults of others, in others, then we are at the beginning of patience. And this is one of those things that I've rectified in my mind, to look at people when I see them, not in terms as the human being, but rather as a individual trying to find their own way back to God themselves. Perhaps at the moment they're kind of out in the toolies. Might not be on the beaten path right now. We don't know where they're at. But we understand that we all have our origins in him, and they too, in spite of their faults, and we, in spite of ours, all have a seat at his table. Consequently, we're all trying to get to the same place. We're using this earthly experience kind of as a schoolhouse, as a testing ground for us to learn and to prove. It's kind of like a laboratory of life. We're all mad scientists trying to figure out what we got going here, you know. And when we start looking at people not as people, but rather as individuals who have manifested themselves as such as they are, made the choices which have been enveloped to them, then they're no different than we are. They too are trying to get there. Maybe they're not doing it at the moment. And the fact that they're not doing it how you would do it doesn't mean a damn thing either. But you got to give them the rooms to be able to do it. And then you start seeing people as Israel. That's what Cayce says Israel is, seekers. And quite honestly, we are all Israel. We're all seeking wholeness with the Lord. Mildred Davis asked, "What is the Master's definition of patience? Know ye that in patience possess ye your souls." In interpreting, then, how one possesses their souls, that in the loss of patience there is the entering, as he gave, of those influences that would separate the real self, the soul, from the Maker. Hence, in patience, possess ye your souls. One of the other things that I have found when I was building this is that the three stanchions, if you would, of patience, knowing yourself, and self-control are not standalone items. They are all intertwined together. I have found that out because here we are looking at his patience, but isn't this lack of patience an element of self-control, or perhaps lack thereof? And what we're doing is that when we lose patience, we are allowing outside influences which we cannot see to come in and take control of our physical beings. And we are responsible for those actions because it's on our watch in us. Consequently, we need to always make sure that we, to the maximum extent possible within our powers, to maintain patience at all times. Because if you're doing it, then you are in control. There's nobody else driving the ship but you. And when you are in control, you've got to ask yourself, will things go as I desire them, or can I influence them as I would need to be? And the answer is yes, as opposed to, what in the hell's wrong with you? What's wrong? What's going on? You know? And think back to how God treats us. Is he patient with us? Yeah. You know, I've learned this is a hard lesson for me to learn. But I think I suspect, and I'm trying. So it's with intent that I go forth and have an open mind to trying to put patience at the forefront of things in my life. Because I know that there's a need for it. We live in a city with 5 million people. Not everybody's playing with a full deck, you know? And they might cross paths with you. Some people are going to do things that we deem slightly different. It's an opportunity for us to, A, practice patience and not be judgmental. Because we never know the facts. We don't know what the other person's going through. Consequently, the actions that they take might be somewhat different than how we would do it, but who's to say they're wrong? Remember, if the spiritual is put first and foremost, if the purpose of an individual is in the right direction, the material happenings will eventually come right. These may at times appear confusing and as being contradictory, but the law of the Lord is perfect. The mind is the builder. That which we put in our minds will build, they will materialize, they will manifest. We cannot control what other people do. Human free will is the strongest force in the universe. I have it and you have it. We each have a choice in how we're going to apply it. If you can only control your thoughts, words, and deeds, then you cannot control what other people do. You cannot control what other people think. You cannot control what other people say. You can only control yourself. And as Jesus said, it's not what enters into a man that defiles him, it's what comes out. And what comes out? Thoughts come out, words come out, and our deeds represent things that are coming from us. So we got to remember that the law of the Lord is perfect. Faith, trust, patience. It's confusing. Why ain't this happening, dear God? He's working on it. Just doesn't tell you when. All right? Kind of how it works here. But that's the patience part. The self-control part is another element that I found to be most useful in my trek upwards and onwards, hopefully. And then with self-control, things that we are looking at doing is making others above ourselves. Learning to be selfless as opposed to selfish. Applying the fruits of the Spirit and learning to crucify our own egos. This is the key part for him. Self-control. Question: how can body attain greater poise and self-control? The answer: by becoming less and less selfish and more selfless in the desire, in the making of self the channel of blessings to others in him, in the Christ. Self-control, according to this, is wanting to do for others, to be able to help others as you see that there is a need for. To take that which is available to you at the moment and act upon it in a selfless way. And when we do this, and as minuscule as the act may seem, it could truly be a blessing to others. Perhaps one of the smallest things that we can do that could actually impact somebody is to simply smile. Just smile at them. Because what does that say? Doesn't that emit from you to them that, hey, I'm friendly. I'm not here to bust your chops. And I don't know. I mean, I'm looking around and I see society, and I don't see the younger generation being very outward with their facial expressions. They seem like they're very concerned or focused on something. It's like being in New York City everywhere, you know? And I don't know what that is, and I don't know why it's happening, but it's just the impression that I take that, you know, the people don't want to look you in the eye, and they don't want to smile and say how you doing or anything like that. I don't know if that's just me. It could very well be. But again, just something that I see. Out of the 3744 readings, which I believe are the psychic readings, I might be wrong on that. No, 792 are the psychics. With each development, that force, known on the plane as will, is given to man over and above all creation. That force that may separate itself from its maker, for with the will, man may either adhere or contradict the divine law, those immutable laws, as are set between the Creator and the created. Cayce tells us that even God does not have the ability or the right to supersede our free will. But to see, the thing about it is, that's fine. Because in his infinite wisdom, what has God done? He's placed other immutable laws, such as reaping what you sow, as a safety net. Because you know that if you're going to do something that is contradictory to what you should be doing to divine law, then for every action there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction. Eventually you will figure it out. And it doesn't mean that God's going to come down and just, strike you down. Because that's not how he is. I don't believe. We create in our minds and through our own thoughts, words, and deeds our world that whatever we put out will come back to us. And if that which we are putting out is not of a loving intent with loving purpose, then guess what's going to be coming back to you? Things that are not loving and things that are not necessarily going to be pleasant. But you're going to reap what you sow. Again, the when thing comes into play. All right? It doesn't say when it's going to happen, but you can bet your sweet bippy it's going to happen. It's going to happen. You just don't know when. It may be in this lifetime. It may be in 3 lifetimes from now. But it's coming. There's going to be a reckoning somehow. There has to be, because Cayce tells us that what happens on this plane is going to get corrected on this plane. Not to be confused with what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Same concept, a lot less fun. As has ever been, there is no influence that may supersede the will of man. For such are the gifts unto the sons of men, that they may make their souls such as to be companionship with the all-wise, the all-creative forces, or separate from them. In other words, we have free will and dominion to do whatever it is that we want to. And it's a choice, and God's not going to stop us from doing that. Why should he? He has immutable laws in place that take care of it for us. We can make ourselves one with or without the companionship of God. That's a choice that we make. And that choice is not a one-time selection. This is a choice that we make every minute of every day. Again, it comes back to what are we thinking, what are we saying, what are we doing, and why are we doing those things? Are these loving thoughts, or these loving intents, or what? We have the free will to do it. God's not going to stop us. But immutable laws, it's going to come back to us. So whatever we're doing, we can expect blowback. Life, our existence, probably not only on earth, but on other planes, are one big boomerang. What we put out will come back. It's a choice what we choose to put out. So why don't we just make choices that are loving? It may not, come into play in this lifetime, but believe it or not, what we're doing here in this experience is going to have some effect in our previous, in our soon-to-be experiences. Because if we're going to carry over, there's carryovers that go on. And if we do things for the right reasons, with loving intent, then if we do choose to reincarnate here, then we've got some good stuff on our side. Probably got a lot of other crap we've got to get rid of, but that's fine. We're going to have some good stuff too. So the more that we can stockpile the good things by doing loving thoughts, words, and deeds here is going to pay dividends in the future. We can trust that. We can trust that. That's what's going to happen. So we should look for making those choices. Remember, as he gave, the heavens and the earth will pass away. My word shall not pass away. But ye shall give account for every deed done in the body. Hence we find law. Law is love, yes, as love is law. Yet God is not mocked. Whatsoever ye sow, that must ye reap. Universal law. Clint Eastwood said it best. You feel lucky, punk? Well, do you? Yeah, that's what it is. And you see, this is one of the things that, yeah, I read it in the Bible one time. I heard about it when I was in Catholic school. But it didn't mean anything to me until I really started to get into the Cayce readings. Now, once I have become aware that this is indeed how the cow eats cabbage, then maybe I, change my actions a little bit. And it's not just in what we do, but in saying and things like that, but think about what happens with the habits that we incur on life. Some people like to smoke and drink in excess. Cayce's readings tell us that the human body makes all the alcohol and nicotine that it needs. We have the choice to go in and accumulate this from other sources, but the body will pay the price, says Cayce. Reaping what we sow. Reaping what we sow. When I sit there and look at this crap, I'm saying, holy crap, I'm never going to get out of here. I mean, I look at all the stuff that I've done in here before I started figuring this thing out somewhat. And, it's a long laundry list here, people. My God. I'm going to be around a while. So, this is why I'm really trying to go in and start to take the objective and make purposeful with trying to change the direction of my thoughts and my actions and my words. Because I now know, and I get it, that there's going to be a price to pay. All right? As has been given. God created man in his own image and gave. I have set before thee this day good and evil. Choose thou whom thou wilt serve, whether the ideals are set in his way and spirit or the desires of the flesh. This is one of the things that we have got to deal with in our 3D world here. We have to be able to control ourselves. We have humanistic, animalistic desires. We have survival of the fittest mindset, things of that nature. We have things of the flesh. But is it the things of the flesh that are going to get us to the next set of levels, the next step? Probably not. We've got to make the choice to learn to choose whom we're going to serve. Do we want to serve ourselves with self-gratification, or are we trying to serve God? What is it that we're going to do? And he said, there's your choice. Choose. Choose. And that's one very important lesson that I have found. Out of the cooperation chapter, as self receives, so may self give. As may be termed in common parlance, the most interesting thing in life is self. Yet self must become null and void, as losing self in love for another. Yet self must have a part in the losing as in the giving of aid to another. There's 7 billion plus peeps running around here. The opportunities are plentiful for us to be of assistance to others if we so choose. Simply a matter of wanting to do that. Again, the duality that we have in our environment here, in this earthly life. Spiritual-based concepts versus material-based concepts. Some people put simply how they perceive other people, and they're going to rate them and put them on a system. There is no difference between us. Everybody here has had in their life a set of choices which they've chosen. Some choices worked out better than others. Some people are being controlled by outside influences. But it doesn't mean that they're any different than us. We've got to recognize this and understand that, hey, we're all in this together. Am I my brother's keeper? Yeah, we are. Yeah, we are. Simply because somebody is homeless and you're not doesn't mean that you're any better than they are. They too have their origins the same place that you do. They're entitled to sit at the table of the Lord with you. Things not necessarily going right now well for them. Doesn't mean that they're a bad person. Maybe they just need a little confidence and a little help and maybe a smile from you. We've got to put others above ourselves. And we see this in how Jesus did things. Think about some of his final words. Bless them, Father, for they know not what they do. He was trying to actually give them credit to help them. I, on the other hand, would probably be inventing new 4-letter words. I don't think I would have handled it as well. Just saying. But you see, this is what it's about. We've got to recognize that everybody has their own hand of cards they've been dealt. They got to play them. You can help other people. You can help your partner. We got to think of people as partners. Everybody's on the same path trying to get back to God somehow, some way. Maybe they need a little whistle and say, hey, come over this way. And maybe all it takes is just a smile from you or an encouraging word. A helping hand. A word of encouragement. It's the little things. It doesn't have to be, a full, you don't have to be a Gandhi or anything like that. You can be just yourself. And if you see somebody, they need help, help them. Help them. It's important because, and from him we may in mercy find mercy. As we show mercy, patience, truth, justice, loving kindness to our fellow man. For as ye do it unto these, my brethren, you do it unto me. Preferring one above another? No. Preferring others above thyself. That thou may be the arm, the shoulder, the one upon whom someone may lean in coming to know the knowledge of the love of the Christ in their experience. Give them the shirt off your back and the cloak to go with it. Why not? Somebody needs something, give it to them. And you see, this is one of those things that I also learned from the Cayce readings that I never really thought about, is that a lot of times we are going to, in our humanistic ways, in our logic circuitry, try to plan for the future. And we're going to hoard certain things that we might need in the future sometime. There's some people who need it right now. Why can't you give somebody something that they need right now as opposed to keeping it in your rainy day fund? There's people out here in this town right now that are starving. Go hand them a can of beans, they'd probably just love you to death. Helping somebody else. And when you do that, say, hey, here, I mean, you don't have, nothing says that you have to go in, invite them in, and put them in the house, do the whole 9 yards. But you should show them some loving kindness. Apply the fruits of the spirits towards them. Be willing to extend yourself for their benefit. Maybe they need it. Maybe you have something that will help them. As it says here, to know the knowledge of the Christ in their lives. You know, people also see and observe what others do. And when we do this, then you may do an act of kindness for another that somebody observes, and it sparks something in their minds, and then at a later date, perhaps they have an opportunity and they spring into action because, you know what? They saw you do it. Hey, that was a good idea. And again, we're not looking for results. We're not looking for rewards. We are just doing things out of the goodness of our hearts. Because if we do things for the right reasons, the rewards will take care of themselves when we need them. Search for God. We have to contend with many conflicting forces when we would have faith and serve others. Selfishness and sensitiveness shut the ideal from view and prevent a wholehearted cooperation with our fellow man in our daily lives. They may so retard our development that nothing seems worthwhile. Self-control. Can we choose ourselves to be selfish? Can we control ourselves from being overly sensitive? Yeah, the ego's not your amigo. You know? And why are you acting this way? What about it? What are you trying to hoard? What are you trying to keep for yourself? We see this in a lot of our environments. We see it in the workplace. We see it in lives. We see it in the movies. We have people who are very sensitive to things that maybe it becomes all about them, and then they want everybody to cooperate with them so they can do what they want. We can guard against ourselves. We can control ourselves from trying to do that. Because when we do this, we start to put forth the negativity, the negative things in life, then what we're starting to do is retard or lose momentum in our spiritual gains. Cayce's readings are full of that. In this life he gained, in this life he lost from self. Little by little, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, for the glory of the Father, not the exaltation of thine own self. For with the exaltation of self, or the gratifying of desires of the flesh, the door closes. Self-control, knowing what we should know, is that we need to have a spiritual beacon going towards trying to do what he would have us do, not what we want to do for ourselves. Been long under the impression that there's a serious disconnect around here between want and need. We confuse the issues sometimes. What we want may not necessarily be what we need. And what we need is not necessarily what we want. It's like, how much money is enough? It ain't never enough. I gotta have more. Right? We want more. Well, how much you really need? And this is the same thing here. To what degree are you going to try to pursue things for yourself? Exaltation of yourself. Where you're going to do what it is you want to do because you can do it. Doesn't mean that you should. But when we do this, what we are doing, we are closing the Lord, because now we are not letting the light in. If we close the door, the lights stay on the other side. And we are magnifying ourselves. Then it becomes all about us and not others, nor glorifying God. Wrong answer. A follow-up to that, Cayce said, please enlarge on the statement. Through the gratifying of the desires of the flesh, the door closes. Answer. As self is a free-willed agent in a material world with the birthright of the attributes of the sons of God, then gratifying of the earthly desires through the gratifying of the flesh does close the door to the spiritual life. What are you trying to do? If you're going to make conscious choices to do things that make your world, your material world, happier, more satisfying to yourselves, then are you doing it at perhaps the cost of longer-term happiness with God in the spiritual life? Short-term satisfaction, long-term pain. Because if we do things that are for the wrong reason, then they represent, in the skein of time and space, things that we need to learn to overcome again. So, well, that didn't work out so well. We're going to have to go back and retake this test. Got to review this chapter here. Didn't do so good in this area here. And we're not looking at big picture because we've been trained, I truly believe we've been trained to start thinking about material satisfaction. And if you look at our earthly environment, what is the message being transformed? What are the messages coming out there? Do you know what the biggest business in the world is? Pornography. Could you consider that to be gratification of the flesh? Slightly. What's underlying storylines for all of your TVs and movies? PMS. Power, money, and sex. Right? That's what it's all about. Ego's running amok. And that's the way it is. And this is being out there, played over and over and over again, and eventually people start to believe that this is the way it's supposed to be. When in fact it's not. Because these are not necessarily the right reasons to be doing these things. And it's incumbent upon us that we need to think differently. Cayce counsels us that we need to be of the earth and not be in the earth and not of it. We're here. Nothing we can do about it. But we do not have to subscribe to the values and attitudes and beliefs of a material society. We have a choice to make where we don't have to do that. That's a choice that we make day by day. Content, but not satisfied. Content in that, have thy way, Lord. Use me as a channel. Not my will, but thine be done. That is content. Satisfied means gratified, and is the beginning of the falling away, for self is then to be glorified. We don't think so much about contentment versus satisfaction. I think we tend to, in our sloppy use of the English language, mix the two up. Content means being good with what you got. Satisfied. I got all that I want. And if you're content, then you know that you're being given that which you need. And when you're starting to be satisfied, then what happens is that it's all about you. The I, me, my. The internal workings that, hey, let's glorify me and not the other folks. Let's not glorify God because me. It's I who built this. It's I who did this. My hard work. I did this. Have you ever heard people talk about that? I love listening to politicians speak. I count the number of I's they use. It's pretty amazing sometimes. Cayce does tell us, however, that to do with a might with what the hands find to do in the service of the Lord, not in self, not in gratification of self, not in the magnification or magnifying any of the material influences or forces. You're in this world, you don't have to be of it. Follow God. That's what Jesus did. That's what Jesus did. If you really think of Jesus as a pattern and you study what he has done, you'll learn how it was that he contended with the outside world that he had to deal with. And it's pretty amazing. Because he was subjected to all of the influences that we here are. Cayce tells us that there's nothing new under the sun. All the drama that we create for ourselves here, same song, second verse, happened before. Nothing new. Figure it out, right? Going to continue to repeat it until you get it right. Yeah. And that's kind of where we're at with this. The final stanchion, if you would. Knowing self. This was important to me because it did make me realize that I am not a standalone entity. I am part of the whole. I am not out there by myself. There's no difference between me, you, or anybody else out there. We are created to be companions with God. And the way we do this is as the mind being the builder. That's the realization that we can see here in this plane, but I also think it permeates elsewhere as well, in that we get a different view of it. The 2620 readings, Cayce tells us that knowing thyself, that each entity may know itself to be itself and yet one with the universal cause. That's important to me because if we think about what we are told that our purpose is here, that we are, as each soul, an individual, a portion of the whole, with the birthright of creative forces to become a co-creator with the Father, a co-laborer with him, to become a co-creator. Now, think about this. If we are not infinitely patient and we cannot control ourselves, then what kind of a creator are we going to be? What is it that we are going to be creating? Jesus tells us that we will do much greater things than he has. If we cannot control ourselves, and if we can't be patient and we don't know ourselves, then what are we going to be doing as, let's just, for lack of a better term, a universal co-creator? What is it that we're going to create? Could it be that we are here, as Cayce told us earlier, to learn patience, so that when we get into an environment where we are creating, that we are going to be able to deal with the ramifications thereof, of that which we deal by patience, and that if we can exhibit self-control to know ourselves, to control ourselves against any outside influences, that we are in better shape? Could it be that we are here right now trying to go through the apprenticeship program, if you would, so that when we do reach a certain stage, we don't make the same mistakes that we did before. We have a better understanding with respect to disobedience, with respect to universal laws, with respect to having overcome our egotistical selves and the desires of the carnal and the flesh and the material. Then once we reach that stage, then are we in a better position to create? I think about this often. And I said, maybe this is what it's all about. And to know ourselves so that, remember, we're just a little dot on the line of eternity. We often think that eternity goes this way, but it also goes back this way. And where are we at right now? We're just a dot in there. There is no time, there is no space. But maybe we are in the learning stages to learn to be able to get our greatness so that we can be like Jesus, so that we can be a companion to, a co-creator with God. And maybe we too will create a world where dogs live. Right? That of the Spirit is the spark, or the portion of the divine that is in every entity, whether complete or of the evolution to that completeness. This ties right back to patience, ties right back to self-control. The spark of it, whether it's complete or of the evolution to that completeness. Aren't we all evolving? And not necessarily from monkeys. We are evolving spiritually. We are using our material experiences so that we can spiritually evolve, so that we can become worthy companions and co-creators with the Father. But everybody is doing the same thing. It's just that some people don't know that. And that's okay. They will figure it out. But it's imperative that we recognize that we are a work in progress. Everybody we see, everybody that we meet is a work in progress. Each to their own. They're trying to get to where they're going to go. Cayce tells us that we should study of these through their phases and forms, and especially through any of those phases wherein the carnal or the material or normal forces are laid aside and the ever-present elements of spirit and soul commune with those forces as found in each entity. Study those and know thyself. Understand that we are little godlets, godlings. And we have the power. We actually, though we have fallen far away from where we were in the beginning, we still do have creative powers, and it's in the mind that we build it with, because we create our own universes. We create our own heaven and we create our own hell with our thoughts. Consequently, what we're being told here is that if we look inside of ourselves and commune with the Spirit and try to do things for the spiritual stuff and lay the things of the world aside and not be done with them, then we will learn to know ourselves, to be ourselves, that we are in fact part with God. We are. He's still with us, because He never turned His back on us. It is we who turned our backs on Him. So all we got to do is turn around, and He'll be there. But we know this, and that if we can go in and do things for the right reason, which means making loving choices and not selfish or material-based choices, then we're going to start to have a deeper appreciation of who we truly are. Thus, we get to truly know ourselves. And the way that it is done, and when it comes around full circle, was that we find the joy, the peace, the happiness that may be ours is in the doing for the other fellow. For gaining an understanding of the laws as pertain to right living in all its phases makes the mind in tune with the creative forces, which are of His consciousness. So we may have that consciousness by putting into action that we know. See, we all know what we're supposed to do. Self-control gives us the choice. Do we do that which we know to do? Do we make the choice to do that? Or do we choose not to for whatever reason? And why would we not to do that? Well, because I don't want to. Hence, here we go again. Right back into the selfishness circle. Okay? Well, I don't want to help them out right now because I got to do this. I got to go to the hairdresser. I got to go here. I got to go there. We put these limitations on ourselves and we elevate ourselves by saying, I got to. I got to do this. I got to do that. Perhaps that's what you would think you have to do. Perhaps that's what you would want to do. But maybe there's something along the path that needs to be done first. And if you truly think about it, and I think about this a lot when I see people driving, and even myself, oh my God, I'm late. So what do we do when we're late? We go a little bit faster. We take a little bit extra chances. Why? Oh, I'm going to be late. And it's okay to be 2 minutes late, but not 5 minutes late. Well, from an ex-managerial standpoint, late is late. What difference does it make if you're 5 minutes late or an hour late? You're still late. Don't endanger yourself getting there. But when we start to put the rightful doing, and we try to put others ahead of ourselves, that's when we're doing the things where we start to attune ourselves with God's ways. It's a choice. It's a choice that we make each and every minute of each and every day. It's a choice that we have to make, at least think about. And this, one of the big things from the Cayce readings for me personally, is that it forces to the forefront of my mind the things to start thinking about. To act with purpose as opposed to react randomly. Oftentimes I think we tend to react when we could choose to act differently. Give a little bit of what Cayce was going through. The study from the human standpoint of subconscious, subliminal, psychic soul forces is and should be the great study for the human family. For through self, man will understand its maker. When it understands its relation to its maker, and it will only understand that through itself. And that understanding is the knowledge as is given here in this state. Here in this state is what Cayce was in. We need to understand that we are part of the divine. We are companions and co-creators. We are no different than anybody else. We are all created equally. It is through the mind of man that we choose to differentiate. And when we understand that we are here primarily for the other fellow, because the other fellow has the same rights as you, and you are the ability to do something right now, then we start to think about how it really works with God. We've got to split the duality between what we perceive and how God perceives. God looks within, we look from without. We need to think about it differently. And when we start looking at this, we'll understand that we are all the same. And listening back to and reading through the Cayce readings, we all made similarly poor choices back yonder. Consequently, here we are, stuck in these sexy material bodies. We have to learn our way back out. But those with whom we are here made the same choices. They're no different than us. And it's not a race. It's not a competition. It should be a joint effort between us and others to work with each other. Again, this is one of the things that where God works it in different ways, because man perhaps cannot conceive of how the rules of the game are played as God would design them. And nor should we. We don't need to know the rules, because we know what the rules are. Love the Lord thy God with our own heart, mind, and soul, and our neighbor as ourselves. That's the rule. That's what you got to do. That's the whole thing right there. Boom. Do that, and don't worry about all of the, the different criterias. We are being told what to do. We just now got to make a choice to do it. When one understands self and self's relation to its maker, the duty to its neighbor, its own duty to self, it cannot, it will not be false to man or its maker. You see, we try to blow smoke up other people's skirt a lot as human beings. Try to get away with a little, extra things. But you see, that's the human side of things. And if we were to, and I'm going to borrow a phrase from business school and apply it to the study of spirituality, to think globally and act locally. When we think globally, we're thinking big spiritual picture. And when we act locally, we are doing the things that we need to do here and now. Controlling that which we can ourselves. Applying patience. Understanding that we are indeed all one. There's no reason for me to hold you back. There's no reason for us to hold anybody back. We should be helping each other up. Unfortunately, the ways of the world permeates our existence. We can get away with this for a lot of people we meet in like-minded circles. But we don't always run in like-minded circles, do we? No, we don't. We have a little variety of life. The spice of life, right? Old picture once about God putting some people in there. We're going to throw a few of these in here to make them interesting, right? And that's what we got to deal with. But we got to recognize that we're all one. We are all one. And we must differentiate the spiritual from the physical. Because at the end of the day, this is what we need to be doing. Helping each other up. This is where we're going. We're all tied at the waist. Somebody's going to help you. You do not necessarily need to help them in return, but rather be willing to help another as you see there is need for. And then once we do that, then it's upon the shoulder of others that we lean to get to the next step. So pretty much it, and this was again my perspective on the things that I think is my purpose and the key elements, the cornerstones, if you would, of that purpose. Patience, self-control, and knowing that it ain't all about me, that we're all in here together. And I hope you were able to take something away from this and find some reflection for yourself and come to your own conclusions.